Imagine this. You need to go to court, you need to seek justice, but you find the door is locked, and the key costs way more than you can afford. Today, we're going to break down a landmark UK legal case that tackled that exact problem. It's a case that asks a really fundamental question. Is justice a right for all of us, or is it only for those who can pay the price?
Okay, so here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll look at the government policy that basically put a price tag on justice. Then, we'll meet the one man who got locked out of the system and see how it affected him. From there, we'll follow his fight as it becomes this huge constitutional showdown. And finally, we'll unpack the court's historic ruling and see why it is still so important today.
So, where did this all kick off? Well, it all started with a single government decision that honestly changed everything.
This, right here, is the question at the very heart of our story. For centuries, the answer seemed pretty obvious. Justice is a right. But a sudden change in government policy started to make it feel a lot more like a product, and one with a really steep price tag.
It all started with this one government order. The Lord Chancellor, who's a top legal official, decided that the courts needed to be funded in a totally new way. And this one decision, it had immediate and massive consequences for everyday people.
Now, what's really fascinating about this is the huge shift in thinking it shows. We went from a system where court fees were, pretty reasonable. They were just designed to contribute a bit, to this brand new reality where the goal was for the courts to completely pay for themselves. The entire financial burden was basically shifted onto the people who needed the justice system the most. And look, £500 might not sound like a fortune today, but back in 1998, for someone on a low income, it was an absolutely insurmountable one.
So yeah, this abstract policy wasn't just numbers on a page. It created a very real barrier for a very real person.
And this is where our story gets a face and a name. Mr. Witham wasn't some big corporation. He was just a regular guy who felt he'd been wronged by his employer and wanted his day in court. He was living on benefits, and he was stuck in this awful spot, earning just enough that he didn't qualify for help with the fees, but nowhere near enough to actually afford the new, higher price.
And that was his exact predicament. The courthouse doors weren't literally chained shut, but with the new price of admission, they might as well have been. He was completely locked out of the justice system, not because of his case, but because of the balance in his bank account.
But Mr. Witham's personal problem was about to become something much, much bigger. He decided to fight back, not against his old boss, but against the government itself. He challenged the legality of the fees in what would become a battle over fundamental principles.
And this just lays out the core conflict perfectly. On one side, you have the government arguing, hey, we're acting legally here. Parliament gave the Lord Chancellor the power to set fees, and making courts pay for themselves is a reasonable goal. But on the other side, Mr. Witham's lawyers made a much deeper argument. They said that access to the courts isn't just some service you buy, it's a fundamental constitutional right. And that's something a government minister can't just erase with the stroke of a pen.
So, with these two powerful arguments clashing head-to-head, the case went before the High Court. And believe me, the decision they made would echo for decades.
Okay, so before we get to the verdict, it is so important to understand this term. A constitutional right isn't just any old right from a regular law. It's part of the very bedrock of the country. It's a right that actually limits the power of the government itself. And this is exactly what Mr. Witham's case was claiming access to justice really was.
And here, in the court's own words, is the bombshell. The judge basically declared that access to the courts isn't some newfangled idea. It's a right that's been embedded in the law for centuries, and, this is the crucial part, it is a constitutional right that a government minister simply cannot abrogate, which is a fancy way of saying abolish or get rid of.
And with that, the verdict was crystal clear. The court sided with Mr. Witham. The order to raise the fees was struck down as illegal. The judges confirmed that while the Lord Chancellor could set fees, he could not set them so high that they actually denied people their fundamental right to seek justice.
So a huge win for Mr. Witham. But the impact of his fight didn't end there. Let's take a look at how this one ruling continues to shape the UK legal world even today. The legacy of this case is just immense. It did four really critical things. First, it basically carved the right to access justice into the bedrock of constitutional law. Second, it drew a clear line in the sand, putting a real check on government power. Third, it powerfully reinforced the rule of law, that core idea that nobody, not even the government, is above the law. And finally, it became a cornerstone for countless future cases about fairness, fees, and fundamental rights.
So, at the end of the day, the story of Mr. Witham is this powerful reminder that access is everything. And it leaves us with a really important question to think about. What other fundamental rights, things like healthcare or education or even voting, might have hidden barriers, financial or otherwise, that stop people from actually being able to use them? It's a question worth thinking about.